Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Cool. So welcome to 7 Habits of Highly Effective Adversaries. This is the precursor to my upcoming talk called 7 Habits of Highly Effective Clickbait Talk Titles. Purely kidding. But before we get started, let's set the stage with some Depeche Mode. And they're all about people are people. So let's just remember that adversaries are people too. This is actually a live attempt of me attempting OSCP unsuccessfully. It happens. And of course, the thoughts and opinions are not that of any of my employers, past, present, future, or otherwise. About me, I'm a senior OSINT specialist with Complex. 2017 DerbyCon Social Engineering Capture the Flag winner. I've placed, as part of the Password Inspection Agency, second and third place at various OSINT CTFs, fourth place this last year solo at DerbyCon. When I came up here, the Password Inspection Agency was in second place in the TraceLab CTF, and pending 2 other competitors, I'm currently in first for their SE CTF. So I like to compete. What can I say? But it's all in that one realm. With that, there's a picture of the black badge. But let's get into the actual fun part and objectives. So with this, I want to provide you a basis to either find the way to work into the offensive world or to get better at being offensive. And by offensive, I'm obviously meaning more of the red operations, red teaming, pen testing, social engineering, all of those. Not necessarily passing gas in an elevator, however offensive that may be. So with this, we're going to talk a bit about making the transition and look at the differences in philosophies and mentalities for red teamers and blue teamers. And then we'll actually look at the 7 habits and how we will actually implement them. So why this presentation? I've been in InfoSec for almost 10 years now. I started out assembling security documentation. It was incredibly boring, and from what I hear, it still is. But I mean, we can get our laughs out all we want, but at the end of the day, they have a seat at the table too. So it is what it is. We have to have compliance. I mean, it is exactly what it is. But over time, my interests were more red, but my job titles didn't really reciprocate that too much. To date, when I was a consultant, I got to do quite a bit of red team stuff. I got loaned to the pen testing team to do social engineering operations and collect some OSINT for them from time to time. Then I did my time as a security architect, which is spoken, sit muted on incident calls, determining if we needed to notify regulators. And then now in my current role, I'm collecting OSINT as part of a project that we're trying to do some stuff with risk, which in turn will feed into compliance, but I get to look at things with the offensive lens again, which is fun. And then there's my roles. Around the end of 2016, I started attending conferences. In 2017, I started speaking. I got active on Twitter. I'm still working on OSCP. I mean, you just got to try harder. Rome wasn't built in a day. And then I've collaborated with people like Adrian Sanabria on the Red Team framework, which we presented at the Red Team Village this year in Las Vegas. So with that, in making the transition, we always have to think of how do we go from blue to red? Well, we need to understand the differences first. And something I've always heard is a broken clock is right twice a day. While that's not directly applicable to that, it's close enough because as a blue teamer, we're expected to be right every single time. When we are not correct, someone gains their access, they do their thing. We end up the target of investigative journalism, maybe get a Twitter mockery, getting the peanut gallery to weigh in on what the company did or did not do right, when they could have been doing everything correct up until this one point, and it was just a massive failure. Whereas as a red teamer, you only have to be right that one time to gain that access. Granted, there are multiple that one times throughout succession of a full engagement, a full attack pattern, but you only have to be right that one time. And also with blue team, they kind of have more of a team mentality. because you have your shift work. You have multiple layers of the SOC, level 1, 2, 3, whatever. Then you have your incident responders, and you have all of your architects and whatever. And ultimately, that's blue team. That's a huge team effort. And red team, not necessarily. Not saying that red teamers don't participate in team environments, but they can be just as successful as a lone wolf. If they take the time, collect the OSINT, do the attacks, they don't necessarily need massive architecture. And because they're doing things behind the scenes that are not detectable, like standing up, say, phishing architecture or a server that you're going to host your malware on, that's not really detectable unless threat intelligence feeds pick it up. So you can go very lone wolf with that. In terms of the training perspective, if you can't afford SANS, there's really not a whole lot of blue team training past Security Plus, unless you want to talk about like the GRC stuff, including like ISACA and ISC squared stuff. Whereas if you're on the red team side, you have SANS and offensive security, and then there's a lot more training at conferences for red teamers. And then let's just go ahead and get the whole public perception out of the way, and that's especially with conference presentations. Red team talks are like always considered sexy. I mean, blue team, just as sexy to me. I love regular expressions. I mean, you want me to waste a weekend, give me a file and say, parse this. I will waste a whole weekend parsing it and playing with it until I finally fall asleep. But anyway, red team, you also have your red teamers, your social engineers, all of those. And really, this is kind of to play into that. So, this is basically just, what blue team strives to do. They're just trying to burst the red team's bubble. And as we see, it's a team effort. The next slide actually has live footage of Johnny Christmas. He didn't know I collected it. Oh, there it is. This was taken at the Walmart across the street from the Speakers Hotel last night. Exactly. So now that we see this and we see how adversaries work, let's get into the habits. So I would be remiss if I gave a talk and did not mention OSINT. So honestly, better OSINT makes better social engineering, but it also makes more informed pen testing red team type engagements, because these adversaries, they're taking the time to understand what you're using for password reset questions. Anyone in here a fan of Darknet Diaries? Anyone listen to episode 50? Okay, that's the newest episode. It's the one that's got the guy from the Marine Corps that was part of the team that attacked ISIS. And they talk a lot in that episode about the amount of OSINT they collected. And at one point they had hit a snag, and it was like, we need to gain access to this, but it's asking what our first pet's name was. And one of the intel analysts out of nowhere was like, oh, I know that. It's 1515. I mean, it's elite for ISIS, right? And it worked. So that's an example of doing the OSINT in advance to help you later. I surveyed quite a few professionals that I respect in terms of how much time they spend doing OSINT as opposed to actually attacking. And the numbers varied between 40 and 65%. So you have a 12-hour engagement, 6 hours of it, do some OSINT, find out, because you can find out things like operating system. Do they use a VM? How do they receive their email? Do they filter using Proofpoint or Mimecast or something like that? Do they have SPF, DKIM, DMARC? Are they using the cloud? Are you going to run into a situation like Mike Felch and get your personal Google accounts locked out because you're targeting their G Suite? So these are all things that you can find out via OSINT with very little to no detection capability for the person. So, with that, we can also find out about company culture. Does it seem like they get trained? Do they have a whole lot of what I call number 17s? Number 17 is from a group I'm in on Facebook, and they came up with like personality traits of people. Number 17 is the chronic oversharer. So do you have a lot of number 17s chronically oversharing everything? Can you find via a Google search, can you find the configuration file for their router or their backup array? I say this because I found both things. What software is in use? Of course, you can find out web server software, but go look at their career postings. What if they're using Oracle ERP version 12.2.4? You can go to exploit DB, and there's a SQL injection vulnerability and a server-side request forgery vulnerability. Couple those two things together, and you could pretty much pwn that company fairly simply. Know their supply chain. If you're going to do social engineering, if they're using cloud assets, but they're using Azure, you probably don't want to spoof Amazon when you call them. Also, if Walmart is your target, you don't want to mention Amazon whatsoever, because part of their agreement is you work with Walmart, you're not allowed to use Amazon or AWS. So you probably want to spoof like Google or somebody else, perhaps, maybe Azure, whenever you call. But, and the big thing is, OSINT is cheap or free. Right now, I pay for 3 things in the OSINT world. $3.50 a month for a Have I Been Pwned API key. I've paid for Shodan for Life on Black Friday. So later on this month, you're going to have the opportunity to do it too. I'm not a paid rep. I'm just being honest. And same thing with Pastebin. That's the only 3 things I've paid for. I don't use Maltego or any of the paid sources. There's just really no reason, because most of the stuff you can find if you're willing to do the searches. But anyway, off of that soapbox, let's get into enumeration, Enumerate cubed. And what do I mean by cubed? Well, take your time doing the enumeration. This plays into that 40 to 65% of the time. But find out the versions and do your checks with this. Enumerate before you conduct your initial attack to gain your access. Find out your software versions. There's a lot of things that we can find out about that we'll talk about on the next slide that are associated with that. But especially like in a CTF environment or in a Windows environment, SMB, SNMP, SMTP. Unless they are properly configured, they're gold mines. And more often than not, they are not properly configured. I mean, has anyone seen a properly configured SMB that has port 445 open to the public internet? Probably not, because then they wouldn't have had it open to the public internet. But it's just a thing. Consider your web enumeration. There's a lot of stuff within the web headers that doesn't need to be there that people just put in there because they've always done it that way. And those who study people within this industry, Grace Hopper said that's probably the scariest phrase to ever hear of. We've always done it that way. So it's something to consider. And then anyone in here a fan of Nmap scripting engine? What? If you're not, oh, of course Johnny is. Team Johnny over there. It's all good. Oh, we've got another one. Okay, so here's your homework. Go home and play with Nmap scripting engine. In Kali, it's in user share Nmap scripts. That's the path. Go take a look. If you know what protocol you're attacking, whether it be HTTP, SMB, whatever, there are scripts for that will do a lot of the enumeration for you. Granted, yes, it's noisy, but they're there. Something you can use. So just play with it. Trust me. I'm going to save that phrase because I think I use it later in this presentation. But anyway, look for things like shares, ports, services. Something companies need to understand. Shodan is not your asset inventory system. Just as Brian Krebs and other journalists are not your IDS. But anyway, enumerate users. If you can find a user that, I don't know, they come across as a significant number 17, or you see things on their public Facebook that says, sorry, I didn't send any friend request, I was hacked again. That's going to be a good target. Because they're probably going to click on shit. They will do it or die. Find out their host names. Operating systems, you should know that from the OSINT, but you can further refine that. Of course, web directories, languages, and files. And languages, not just like JavaScript, PHP, or whatever the rage is within the mean stack or whatever other stack all the DevOps people are using. But also look at the language setting. Is it ENGB or is it ENUS? Because if you're doing a social engineering engagement, in the US, the word realize has a Z in it. With British spelling, it does not. So that's something to consider. If you're going to claim to be someone, you need to be able to spell like them. So, third habit, live off the land. Remember the basics. If you have to install something, assuming they are monitoring, it's a big assumption, I know, but assuming they are monitoring, that is an opportunity for detection. If you have permission to install software, chances are you've already met any pen test objectives. You're now in the world of red teaming of you're trying to simulate something a specific adversary would do, such as install, say, Tor and email something to yourself. But if you can use PowerShell or Python, they're both on operating systems by default. Granted, yes, there are ways to lock both of them down. Yes, there are ways to detect things, but you're going to be a lot quieter if you're living off the land than if you're having to install or import all of these scripts. You do have to consider how to get the scripts in, because a lot of SOCs, they're going to look for things like get, wget, curl, those types of things. Also for non-HTTP traffic on ports 80 and 443. I mean, specifically 4444. I mean, that's Metasploit's default. So if someone's working in a SOC and not explicitly trying to monitor for that, there could be some problems. But with that, you want to find out what you need to have a concept of normalcy. You want to be able to blend in with the behavior of the host. And the host could be the host system, or it could be the host user. If you know, for example, that Samantha in HR that you're targeting goes to lunch at Chick-fil-A on every Thursday at 11:30 a.m. and comes back at 1:15 p.m., that is probably not the time to attack. Because if they are using user behavior analytics and assuming it's properly configured and assuming it's working, that's a means of detection. A lot of SIMs could pick that up for abnormal activity as well. If you know the CEO is in Bangalore for a conference, I would not attempt to log in from Chicago. There are plenty of VPNs that terminate in Bangalore. Go with those. Things like that. Don't try your Privesk or noisy scripts unless you're prepared for detection. And that may be the right answer. That may be within the scope of the engagement you're being asked to do. That's okay. Again, there's the thing about Shodan. Have I been pwned? Same thing. So I go to the Dollywood theme park probably once a year, maybe twice. It's really close to where I live in Tennessee. And every time, I always get the discount for being a veteran. I mean, I'd rather pay $30 for a ticket than $100. I mean, I don't really wave that flag too hard, but with that one, yeah, I'll do it. And the people who sell the tickets, they are so quick to immediately say, what's your zip code? At this point, I've already signed my receipt. And I'm like, is this required for the transaction? Well, no. Okay. Well, I don't have one. Okay. What's your email address? Is this required for the transaction? No. Well, I don't have one. What's your address? I think you know what my next question is going to be and my next answer. And they're like, the first time this happened, the lady's like, we're giving you a big discount on a ticket. You should give us information. I was like, I'll give you information all day, every day, but I'm not going to give you anything that's accurate because I value my personal security and my operation security, and I'm not going to give data that's not necessary to someone who's just going to A, use it for their data mining so they can try to market to me better, and B, they're going to store it, and I don't have any concept of how secure, how they value the data for it to get dumped and end up on the internet. So then finally we agreed that my zip code was 90210. The next year, same thing. I told him my email address was notify@twitter.com. He didn't believe me, so he put in his zip code. I was like, hey, man, if you want to put in your own zip code, that's cool because it's you screwing up your employer's data analytics. That's on you, man. But anyway, dehash, that's proof that people use garbage passwords. And I said it earlier, journalists should not be companies' IDS. So, don't forget to attempt to compromise credentials. Don't forget password stuffing or spraying. You don't have to brute force everything. Exploitation is not always the answer. Sometimes MSO 8067 or 17010, those are the answer. Sometimes, as long as admin works, if you don't believe it works, ask Equifax. As long as they work, what does it matter? You don't have to come in being a brute force nation state like Jenny Radcliffe when it comes to social engineering, subverting all the physical security controls, getting Deviant Ollam to come in and throw his film over the door to be able to pop the doors open. If you've not seen that, take a look at it. You don't have to do that if you can just as simply come and knock on the door and they say, password, please. And you say, New England clam chowder. And then they say, white or pink. Does anyone know the answer to this? No Ace Ventura fans? The answer's pink. But it's from Ace Ventura Pet Detective. But as long as, if you can go and knock on the door and get through that way, what's this even for? Because unless they've got cameras, and chances are if someone's going to let you in the door that easily, even if they have cameras, A, they may not be recording, B, they may not be plugged in, and even if they are, who's going to watch them? But diversify your tool sets. Don't just use Hydra. Consider Medusa. Consider Encrack. There are other tool sets to use, some of which you can alter your user agent strings and look like you're something else. When our parents said you can be anything you want to be when you grow up, they kind of were talking about user agent strings. There's all sorts of things. Don't put all your eggs in the same basket. You don't have to be a nation state unless the client asks for it. And if you want to be a nation state, based on what a lot of the APT reports are saying, what are they doing? This. So you don't have to go in with some like ultra whiz bang solution to successfully do one of these engagements. If that's what they're asking for, if they're a very mature company and they want you to run with some sort of newly dropped 0-day, okay, go for it. But at the same time, there's a good chance that they would go down via social engineering or default creds or something to that effect. And this is something that comes to mind as well. The Zen of Python. Anyone familiar with this? If you want to read it, just open a Python interpreter and type import this, and it pops up. It's an Easter egg. But basically, there are 4 lines in this that are, well, actually 5 lines that are very important to this, right? Explicit is better than implicit. Simple is better than complex. Complex is better than complicated, right? It's simplicity in getting in. At the same time, readability does count, hence my regular expressions. Now is better than never, but never is often better than right now. That's more on the blue team side. Sorry to get philosophical with you. I really apologize for that. But anyway, in not being a nation state, go back to habit 3 with the PowerShell or Python. Consider this, though. If you can get on a host, you can send an email to yourself. You can send an email with an attachment to yourself. You could use something like Tor. You might be able to use like social media or an API, something to that effect, or upload to the cloud. Is there really any need to go pwning the galaxy? Not really, because you can walk right out the door with their crown jewels. Granted, they may have DLP software that may catch you, but even if they do catch you, it may be too late. So, and that goes to my final point on this slide about, you don't need 0 days when companies are failing to do basic security measures. Again, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention social engineering. If you want to watch some calls after this talk, I think there's going to be a few more calls downstairs. But basically, technology typically doesn't fail. Routers route, switches switch. I'm really unsure what a lot of vendor appliances do. I think the vendors are unsure too, just being honest. But, at the same time, people we have that weakness. We want to be helpful. Chris Hadnagy says the most important phrase in social engineering is, "Can you help me?" Every time somebody answered the phone while I was competing downstairs, I used it, and with the exception of one very, very, very aggressively secure woman in Vancouver who hung up on me quick, people wanted to help. So with it, I mean, people want to be helpful. You know, you see someone with coffee and donuts in their hand struggling to get to the door, especially if you think you're going to get a donut out of it, you're going to hold that door. I mean, truth is truth. You have a clipboard, a toolbox, a ladder, or donuts, you're probably getting in. Just being honest. With phishing, according to the Semantic ISTR, the global success rate on phishing emails is 13%. Let that sink in. It sounds like a really low number, but then also factor in how many emails are sent per second. 80% of those 13%, so that comes to about 10.4%, contain malware. So 1 in 10 emails that you're receiving contains malware. So you do the OSINT from habit number 1, your efficiency has just went through the roof. Merge it with other disciplines. With social engineering, it merges very easily with physical. It merges very easily with OSINT. It's coming in really nicely with pen testing and red teaming. But going back to the presentation I gave last week at the Wild West Hackin' Fest, has anyone thought about weaponizing memory forensics? And in the presentation I did last week, basically the pretext is, I'm a forensic consultant. I've been hired by your company because you've had adverse events. Another computer on the network has been fully compromised. We don't believe your computer has been compromised. We don't think anything's wrong, but that other computer did communicate with yours, and I've been sent to get a memory image just to make sure. You walk out the door with the memory image. Keep in mind, the person has to have at least local admin for you to get the memory image, so that is a constraint, but I have a backup plan. You can run Mimikatz across the memory image using volatility. You can dump the entire, you can do hash dump and find out the NTLM hashes. You can see what was on the clipboard. You can look at netstat. You can see what was put into the command line. You can look at Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer browser history. That can give you all sorts of situational information about the company to go forward. And then that goes back into enumeration cubed, because I did mention the steps of enumeration, but then what makes it cubed is you, after you get your initial exploitation, enumerate some more to find out how you can escalate. And then once you get your full escalation, enumerate some more and see where you can pivot to. Using the memory image, you could do that very easily. If they don't have administrative rights, you can very easily put proc dump on a thumb drive and dump, I don't know, say Firefox. And if they've got the password stored in the browser, guess what you've got now? All you've got to do is strings and then pipe it to a grep for whatever you're looking for. And it's right there in plain text for you. And that's something that forensics professionals have been doing for years. But we don't really hear people on the offensive side talking about using that as an attack vector. And yes, some of the feedback I got at Wild West Hackin' Fest was it would be very hard for me to stop at getting the memory image without trying to do something else. Absolutely, because when you're getting in, you're going to try to pwn, right? But if you can do this and be very silent about it and walk out the door, no one's going to detect you messing with a memory image in your evil lair with your black hoodie, your mom making your Hot Pockets, Cheeto dust on your keyboard, listening to dual core or trance music. Hey, I call it like I see it. My favorite Cheetos are the spicy Cheetos. And I like pizza Hot Pockets. But, you know, that gets down to the point. You know, you don't have to be super elite if you can't explain it. So go off and read the red team or the blue team reports. Read what don't concern yourself so much with the IOCs, because that stuff can change on a second's notice. Concern yourself with the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the adversaries are taking. It doesn't matter if you use the same hash of a Python script that they use in, say, fileless ransomware. You can coordinate with your target company and be like, hey, here's the hashes for what I'm going to do. Let's see if anybody detects this. You can do that without having to try to replicate their stuff. Absolutely. But if you can't explain it, why do it? I mean, I came up with a term earlier this year. It's called a technical Tarzan. And it's one of those people that want to beat their chest and talk about how stupid the users are and how great they are at hacking things. But when you say, okay, you pulled this attack off, what does it mean to the business? Explain to a manager why they should invest money into fixing whatever you just broke. Technical Tarzans can't do that. That's what makes them technical Tarzans. But anyway, emulate adversaries, not other pen testers. Haroon Mir said that a couple years ago at 44Con. But take the approach that salespeople take. Common phrase that salespeople use. Tell me about the concerns and problems you're trying to solve within your organization. That's wide open social engineering. But anyway, take the time to understand what's keeping their management up at night. Find out what their crown jewels are, not necessarily the contents of them, but for example, you're going against a software company. More than likely, it's going to be their source code. Find out what the crown jewels are, and then help them develop the objective based on that, a realistic scenario. Because sometimes you don't have to get DA. Domain admin, yeah, I mean, it's a way to beat your chest, but not every adversary does it, and you can cause just as much havoc, mayhem, dystopia, whatever you want to call it, without it. So with that, study the threat intel feeds. I understand that a lot of threat intel feeds are garbage. I will readily admit that to you, especially the ones that are very heavy on IOCs, because you want to know about how the organizations surveilled the target. You want to find out how they gained their initial foothold, like what kind of phishing attacks they used, or what kind of low-level account that they took over, and then how they did the privilege escalation. That's what's important. You might learn something that might actually help you long-term as well. And keep in mind that there is a lot of vendor FUD with that. It just is. But a lot of people put stuff up on Twitter, even LinkedIn. InfraGard puts up some stuff in the United States, understanding that you have to be a U.S. citizen to join InfraGard. That's kind of a moot point here. But, at the same time, it could be the difference between DA and NA, which is completely contradictory to what I said about you don't have to have DA, but it is also nice. Habit 7, remain adventurous and curious. Don't stop. Try harder. All these things we hear. Go to conferences. See, you're already one step ahead. You're already in habit 7. Read blogs. There are blogs everywhere. Alien Vault, now ATT Cybersecurity, they have some really good ones. Tripwire has some good stuff. ITSP, and then vendors, Trusted Sec, Black Hills Information Security. Leslie Carhart with Tisiphony has a lot of good stuff as well. Understanding that's not who she works for, it's just her website. But study things. I think Johnny might even have some stuff, maybe. Study. Write blogs. If you have something that interests you, if you don't want to set up your own domain and do all that stuff, that's cool. Go get a WordPress, go get a Medium account, whatever, and just write it, post it there. I mean, it'll help you out because in the long term, when you talk to employers and they say, hey, can you show me some of your, tell me about your lab. It's like, well, I really don't have a lab, but I do have some blogs about the stuff I've researched, and I've got GitHub that goes along with some of the scripts associated with it. That'll be just as impressive. So having that, it shows that you can communicate clearly about technical topics, and it also shows that you are committed to learning. If you're comfortable with it, give talks. It doesn't have to be necessarily on this stage, a DEF CON Black Hat stage. It could be with your local DEF CON groups, CitySec, ISSA, ISC Squared, all the above. DerbyCon groups, they're coming as well. So you've got that. Network with people. So thank you for coming to my talk. The talk's not over. I'm just saying thank you for coming. But LobbyCon is a great way to learn things too. because a lot of times the talks are actually recorded. You can watch them later. You can't LobbyCon later. Have a home lab. Read DA 667's guide. His name's Tony Robinson, but read his guide about doing a home lab. Feel free to mentor someone. You can learn just as much from mentoring someone as the mentee can learn from you mentoring them. Because sometimes they'll ask questions that you never really thought about. And then take courses if you can. So, of course, remain curious. It's very important. If you're not adventurous, you can become adventurous. I just don't suggest doing it in this manner where you have to walk around for 3 hours at a time barefoot. For several movies, only for about a third of the way through the last one, throw a ring in a volcano, walk back just to drink a little bit, and roll the credits. So, just consider it. I mean, something, if it makes you, if you're slightly uncomfortable with it, that's giving you an opportunity to grow because you're going to gain your comfort with it. On the topic of mentoring, Brian Austin and I co-founded Through the Hacking Glass. We're trying to get it off the ground. Right now, we have a significant disparity between mentees and mentors. It's like a 31-to-1 ratio, mentees to mentors, so we're going to have to do cohorts. Basically, we understand certifications give you this piece of information, academia gives you this piece of information. We're trying to help you in the middle. So if you want that 14 years of Ethereum experience, okay, y'all don't get that one. Ethereum's not been around that long. A vendor actually asked for that much experience and made it to Twitter. 20 years of blockchain experience. We can't help you with that, but if you need some experience with like Cisco routing or something, that's something that we can help you with as the program matures. We're currently establishing a board of directors, and we're actually trying to get everything a little bit more operational, and then we'll establish the cohorts unless we get a boatload of mentors. And you can be a mentor and a mentee as well. But most importantly, don't be afraid to beat the drum to your own cadence. Some commonalities. This is going to be controversial. Here's a hot take for you. The red team is really the blue team. What I mean by that is the red team, they go off, they do their thing, they produce a cohesive report that in theory, someone is going to read and act upon. Key operator there in theory. And they seek to improve the overall security of an organization. By definition, that makes them what? Blue team. Both can be technical, both don't have to be. If you're trying to learn, set up a home lab, something like the detection lab. I think it's Chris Long's detection lab. Set that up and attack it. It's going to have the monitoring capability. So not only do you get to play with attacking things, but then you also have all the SIM artifacts to go back and learn from. So you can learn the red and the blue at the same time. And both sides really benefit from learning from each other. But if you're currently in a role and you want to make a transition one way to the other. So say, for example, you're a programmer or you work in AppSec. Well, you can very easily go to pen testing and exploit dev. You just have to look at the way that you're programming things. Look at what the end game is, what the inputs are, how it works together. If you're writing things from the ground up, you have a leg up on people who don't have that background in learning exploit development or reverse engineering malware. Threat intelligence, there's a lot of OSINT associated with that. That works both directions. Reverse engineering, you already reverse engineer malware. Why not reverse engineer executables to find buffer overflows and other vulnerabilities that you could use to gain access? It's there. So I do offer OSINT training online. It's live online. Here are my next two training sessions, November 5th and November 18th. The one on the 5th is a 4-hour basic OSINT training. The one on the 18th is a 3-hour regular expressions training. I've got coupon codes up. If you want to come, there are some discounts associated with that. I'm going to open it up for any questions, concerns, complaints, grievances, thoughts, opinions, or otherwise. No, that phrase is not rehearsed. Maybe it is. Okay, and as a final note, if you implement these habits, this may become you. And if there's nothing else, that's all, folks.